Hey folks, this is Mobile AppSec 101. I'm Tony Ramirez, and this is a course on mobile application security testing. Today is the second video of the Mobile AppSec 101 series, the mobile landscape. So as the title would tell you, today's objectives are learning about that mobile landscape, learning about mobile app development, learning not only that, but the differences between the types of testing that we'll get into, and it's static versus dynamic. But not only that, we also have to have an intimate understanding of the mobile attack surface to really get information out of how we should be testing apps. And we're going to cover that too. So we got a lot ahead of us. So starting off, we're going to really be covering Android versus iOS. So right away, the first topic that really always comes up when you tell people you're mobile testing or you're doing mobile app development or you're doing any mobile app security testing is, do you have iOS or do you have Android? Do you have, a iPhone or do you use an Android Pixel device or something? And the truth is those aren't really a good indication of whether an app is secure or not, because both platforms have their advantages over one another. Both have good things, both have bad things. And you know what? It's kind of Wild West because now you're starting to see new versions of iOS specifically for tablet. And Android does have its tablet OS, which is the Chrome OS. But I mean, that's only just the tip of the iceberg with what mobile development really is. So let's actually dig into what that actually means. From a high level, yeah, you have iOS versus Android, you have Apple versus Google, but really it's native and hybrid development. And there's a lot of languages, there's a lot of frameworks that are going in to actually creating apps. And it really isn't clear cut. For instance, on the native side, you have Java, Kotlin, Objective-C, and Swift, and you have the NDK, and those are native languages, and they're how a lot of people are developing apps. But more and more people are using hybrid tools, and the advantage to these hybrid tools are they allow you to create apps for a single code base that will work across both platforms. But a lot of people always ask me, hey, well, isn't native app development more secure than hybrid app development? Isn't hybrid app development more, efficient than native? And the truth is that when you look at these things, the truth is it really falls into the hands of the developer. Whether you're developing a secure app or not, it doesn't really matter which framework you're using or if you're developing natively. Really what matters is how your developer is handling security issues within your app. That kind of leads us to this other topic of static and dynamic analysis, source code versus binary, and ultimately how we're going to be doing mobile testing. So let's dig in a little bit on mobile testing. So in mobile testing, you basically have two different types of scenarios. You have static testing and you have dynamic testing. On the static side, we're looking at source code or binary. We're looking at, what's actually being written by the developer and what bad coding practices are they using. And maybe they aren't using any. What's great about it is there's not a lot of configuration, but it is less accurate when we're actually doing testing. And when I'm talking about testing, we're talking about security testing. On the dynamic testing side, we're testing on real devices. We're seeing how that app runs on the device. And really, we're creating real-world scenarios. The challenge there is a little bit of configuration behind that, but you're getting real-world results. And the point I'm going to give away to you right up front is that you need both. Whenever you're doing any types of app testing, you really need static and dynamic testing, both involved. So let's actually dig into what static testing is. Typically, with a static testing engine, what you're getting is a binary. That binary is what gets installed on the device and runs. It's pretty straightforward in that sense. But apps are developed in kind of a weird way today. You have all these third-party components, third-party libraries, third-party parts that really the developer leverages so they don't have to recreate those parts themselves. What's great is it streamlines the coding practice, but those third-party components aren't always secure. So that's a part of testing. If you're not doing static analysis correctly, you may not be testing those parts. So when you're looking at static testing tools, you want to make sure that you're testing the entire binary. That's an important part of testing. Usually on its own, it does lead to false positives because static analysis is looking for certain terms, it's looking for certain actions, certain correlations on how that source code looks and how that decompiled code looks, and it's making some indications on whether, secure coding is being done correctly. Contrary to static, you have dynamic testing. And unlike static, where you're looking at a binary, dynamic, you're actually running the app on a device. And the advantage here is you're actually able to see if the app is exploitable on a device. So that means that you're getting real-world results. That's why we said that earlier. Oh, you're getting real-world results because you're actually running it and you're trying to exploit it on that device. It also means that you have to actually run through workflows on that app and you actually have to perform processes. And the less you exercise, the less data you're going to receive back. Because, again, applications are fairly big. They're not straightforward. There's a ton of different workflows that are involved in apps today, and they all do different things. They communicate to different endpoints. They communicate to different parts of that code base. And really, it's important to exercise that app as much as possible. And as one thing that I will repeat during this series, learn to exercise apps, because the more you exercise an app, the more data you're going to get back. This leads us to this next concept of the mobile attack surface. What are we actually testing? What is it that we're looking for? What's important in mobile? What's important to the app? And really, we could break this up into a few components, but really comes down to the code functionalities within that app, or the data that's stored on that device, or how that app communicates. And that app communications aren't always as simple as you think, because you have one end of that where your device is actually sending a request out to some server in the cloud or on some server you own, wherever, doesn't matter. And it has to set up that TLS connection. If it doesn't do it correctly, then there may be some security issues with your app. Then on the other end of that are API issues. Your server actually has to handle those API requests correctly, handle authorization correctly, session management correctly. These are all really important topics in security. But all of them are part of that mobile app security spectrum. And we want to make sure that when we're testing, we're looking at all these components because they're all important, because they all apply to mobile app security, whether it's iOS or Android. And again, this all applies to both. So this brings us back to that thing I said before. You need both. You need both types of testing. Testing in mobile means you need to be able to see how that app runs on a device, but also see what the binary has in it and how that app was developed. And, there are things that are easier to test dynamically than they are to test statically. And there are things to test statically that are way easier to test than they are dynamically. And you need both. So a perfect example of something that's easy to do dynamically is network testing. We set up a proxy, we observe those calls sent by the app, and we're able to test them and see what's going on. Or seeing what's stored on the device itself. It's really easy for a tester to go on that device, see what's being stored by that application, and actually determine if it's sensitive or not, or if it's something that's unnecessary. But on the flip, on the static side, looking at code quality, build configurations, things like, hey, there's debuggable code in here. Hey, there are, things that really shouldn't have been configured this way. Simple things like, code protections, free security options are really easy to determine if they exist on an application using static analysis. And then there are things that really you need both. And really, a lot of these things that seem like, hey, it's difficult to do on dynamic and it's difficult to do static. When you use static and dynamic testing together, you really get better results. And like a perfect example of that is cryptographic methods. It's really easy to determine if your application is using some cryptography, and it's easy to determine from a dynamic sense how that crypto is being used and when it's being used. But being able to use static and dynamic together kind of determines how that's being used in what reference. And context is so important in security because we want to understand how that information is being handled and used. And context is, again, the key for a lot of the things we're doing here today. So we kind of zoomed through a few topics today. We looked at the mobile app landscape, how static and dynamic testing kind of work together, and how that mobile attack surface looks and how important it is. I think as we go forward, you're going to use that information to better understand how to perform that testing and understand why that's important. So as we go into these next videos, be sure to reference back to these because they're useful information as we expand on our knowledge.